You are listening to the IFH Podcast Network. For more amazing filmmaking and screenwriting podcasts, just go to ifhpodcastnetwork.com.
Welcome to the Successful Screenwriter Podcast, where we discuss anything and everything screenwriting. Here we interview successful screenwriters and filmmakers to find out just what it takes to make it in the industry. Welcome to the podcast. I have on an awesome guest today, Emmy award-winning cinematographer Michael Tushaus. Michael, thanks for being on.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I wanted to have somebody on to talk about cinematography because it is visual storytelling. As screenwriters, we like to believe that we at least see the story as we're writing it. So I wanted to kind of dive into a professional like yourself and get your perspective on cinematography and creating that visual story within a screenplay. Before we get into that, I want to kind of get your origin story.
It's been an interesting path for my career. I started more in the theatrical world starting off. I used to work like as a set designer and a lighting designer, tech director, and so forth in like regional theaters. I did a lot of that work out in LA, did a little bit on East Coast with it as well. But growing up, I always was working with my parents' video camera and was making videos and sketches, and ended up making my first kind of feature-length movie per se my senior year in high school.
Oh, wow.
And so it was always there. Yeah, it was always something that I wanted to do. So I was the AV Club geek, directing all our AV Club programs from coverage
awesome.
of like the sports games, whether it be like basketball game coverage or whatever. And then we developed our own talk show and started doing skits for it. So, trying to model after all the late night talk shows we saw, but of course doing it in a very unprofessional way.
Awesome.
I was only 16, 17 years old at the time, So, but that truly was a passion of mine to do that. And it always stuck with me. And I, would try to do short film projects and so forth over the years. When I moved out to LA, I tried to shift focus. I did also work as an actor a lot of the times on stage, and transitioned more and more into acting on screen. And it ended up being a serendipitous thing, because once I came to Las Vegas, and I came here originally getting a job with Cirque du Soleil. I was working backstage for Cause. So that was my theatrical connection to get me here to Vegas. But I really feel like my career here in Vegas has been very serendipitous, because then everything that I took from there, I was able to bring here, and then it helped launch my film career,
Yeah.
Like the acting side of it, I ended up auditioning for an independent feature film called Territory 8.
Okay.
I had just finished a kind of a 35-minute Western that I had produced and acted in. And a director at the time locally, his name's Kelly Schwartz, and I believe you know Kelly.
Oh, yeah, Kelly's
introduced
great.
us. So that was how I got introduced to Kelly. He saw my shorts. He thought that was really cool, and he asked if I would come and audition for Territory 8. So I ended up auditioning. I got the role, and started a kind of a working relationship with him and other filmmakers here in town through that. My focus was to get behind the camera ultimately, but I think that it's weird. I think a lot of actors, you wouldn't hear that, where they're like, oh yeah, I wanted to act to get behind the camera. Not necessarily. You'll hear the opposite of they want to act to get into bigger projects. But I kind of saw where I really wanted to go with things, and so ultimately I shifted and was able to, because I'd started my own business as well, called Digisphere Productions, and so So, I was doing video production work behind the camera with Kelly and a lot of our colleagues here. Um, but in more recent years, I've transitioned to being a DP for him for the features that he has done. And we're actually in pre-production now for his next feature called Help Me.
That's cool.
And so I'll be DPing that again. So yeah, it's really become much more focused in the camera world and cinematography, not just camera, but obviously dealing with a lot of the lighting aspects of that,
Yeah.
and ultimately that visual vision of projects.
So it sounds like really kind of over time you found your way throughout the industry. I mean, because you landed
Yeah,
some cool roles. I think you're in like To Wong Fu and
yeah.
yeah. So you did, I did my research. So you had some cool roles, and then you kind of found yourself within the industry, and seems to be like this is your jam, this is your gift, right?
Yeah, it's been very rewarding too. I feel
Yeah,
like I'm able to work regularly, and here in Vegas,
it's
there's
awesome.
a lot more work than you'd think, I guess.
That's interesting because you don't think in Vegas there's going to be a big film community, but it sounds
Yeah,
like there is.
yeah, there is. I think it's not huge, but it doesn't compare to the community in Los Angeles and so forth.
Well,
But it's growing, it's budding,
yeah,
and I think that the people I've worked with here are just great. Like, I have
it's
so
awesome.
much rapport with everybody here, and I think that we all try to help each other, even as businesses, because I think a lot of us are under certain umbrellas for our businesses. I have my Digisphere umbrella, and Kelly has his Indie Film Factory
Right.
umbrella, and so forth and so on. I could name so many people, and we really help each other on how we're getting work. So there may be gigs where
I
you're the
love
one
that.
man band, or you get hired by your colleague to
Yeah,
be the DP on something they're directing or producing. So it's so often that we're referring each other to
that's awesome.
our jobs.
Yeah.
It's very rare that I'm actually like applying for a gig. It's usually a reference based
Oh,
job
wow.
that comes through. So
That's a beautiful film community right there.
yeah,
And
yeah,
it shows how important it is to network when people are sending you gigs who could technically be your competition, but you're all working
yeah,
together. That's really actually quite beautiful.
yeah.
So let's kind of dive into cinematography. So
Okay,
as a writer, we like to, see the scene and then write the scene and try and write the scene visually.
yeah.
As a cinematographer, how are you coming onto a project?
I think that it's always it's a collaborative art, right? So
Okay.
you I never try to come into a project and just be like, okay, damn it, this is my vision and it's my way or no way.
Yeah.
I've certainly worked with some DPs that are like that. In my earlier days, I was working as an AC, and so I got exposed to some DPs that it's a wide gamut of personalities out there. Some of them are
Well,
little Napoleons,
I'm
and
sure.
some
Yeah, it's a
are
lot like screenwriting.
yeah, yeah. So, but I think that again, I think it is a very collaborative process. And so I definitely like having that conversation with the director, with the writer. I know I've mentioned Kelly, so he's a good example,
Sure.
since we've done a lot of feature work recently,
Yeah.
that he's the director writer usually of his projects.
Right.
But it's been really great because like he'll share the scripts with me, and I'll be able to give him notes and say, what would be kind of cool is if you could do this to adjust, so I feel like I'm actually in a way helping to contribute to that's the storytelling process, to an extent. Obviously,
Yeah.
I give him the respect that he's doing what he needs to do, and it's his baby first in those projects. So
Right.
um,
Well,
and then when
he's
we
got a hell of an eye. I can tell you that much. But I want to hear. Have you been on a project with a
Mhm.
director that didn't have a good vision, where you had to almost like carry the film?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've been mostly fortunate that if it's been a bigger project that
Yeah.
that have probably vetted it well enough that I just didn't come into a project cold. I certainly
Okay.
could have. I think there's
Yeah.
certainly been opportunities that have come up, and I honestly would rather turn them down than do them and be really miserable working
Gotcha.
on a project that I feel like the director just doesn't. I really, yeah, those calls have certainly come in,
Yeah.
and yeah, and I think that's just part of the vetting process at the beginning is trying to see how much vision do they have, how much preparation have they put into this project, and if I feel like if they're winging it,
Yeah.
I really just don't want to be a part of it, and at that point it's like I know that I work enough that I don't need like the money that bad where
Right.
it's like, oh my god, I'm starving, I gotta take this gig no matter what.
Yeah.
Like I've been there, there was certainly that phase in my life, but I'm past that now, and so I know that at least I have that ability to say yes or no.
Right.
Because I don't want to like come into something and just dread it, and I don't want to be in a weird working relationship with somebody that that it just doesn't click. And so I think that it's really important to have those initial calls and Zoom calls or whatever we're, all these different types of meetings we're
Yeah.
having now, to get accustomed, acclimated, and meet, the people involved with it and get that feeling first. I'll always do that before I even say, I might be able to, or yes, I always want to have that meeting first.
I mean, it's great
So
advice, really. Even
yeah,
in a screenwriting mindset, it's good to think about, am I meshing with the client? Is this the
right.
right gig for me?
Hmm.
I've been approached with gigs before where I've turned them down because I didn't feel I could contribute enough value to that gig, that I wasn't the right writer. But I might
Yeah,
have known the right writer who was the appropriate voice, and then I've sent them that gig. I've done that before. So I
yeah.
think I think you're right. You don't need to just take everything, and it is definitely important to vet who you're going to be working with in the project you're on.
I think if you don't, then you you don't want to ever feel like you're obligated to the job and
Yeah.
that you don't have some kind of passion for the project.
Yeah.
If you don't feel passionate about it and that you just are like, oh, I'm just doing this as a gig, it's just a paycheck, then it
Right.
just becomes like any other like gig for money, right?
Right.
And we certainly all have those extra gigs that we're doing that it might be more of a corporate shoot or whatever it is, and you always find ways to have fun with it. And
Hmm.
not saying that any of the gigs I've ever turned down could have ended up good, maybe, but especially when it comes to like filmmaking, when we're getting into like features, and the thing that I always wanted to be doing growing up, and all this hard work to try to get to this point, I don't want to, honestly, I just don't want to waste my time and
Yeah.
do something that I just don't feel the groove with,
Right.
because I think it's going to show in your work.
I think you're absolutely right. If you're just phoning it in for a paycheck, it's not going to
Hmm.
be as dynamic or powerful as it could be. So
Yeah,
when you're actively setting up shots,
yeah.
and you've had the conversation with the director, and we both agreed, both agreed on the tone.
Hmm.
I'll give you an example. Were you on Abigail Haunting?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
So
So
that,
I
yeah, it was DP for that. Yeah.
I watched that, and so there was some really cool shots. There's this clown nightlight that was
Yeah,
super creepy,
it is
and
creepy.
and you set up a shot like that. You obviously you
Yeah,
talk to the director, you get the
yeah,
tone and his vision, and then you decide, okay, how do I kind of create this atmosphere?
yeah.
What are you kind of how are you designing that type of a scene?
Well, it goes back again to preparation. So in the pre-pro, Kelly and I had some really great sessions where we sat down and we would talk through the scenes.
Okay.
And of course I was familiar with the script and everything, but at that point we're breaking it down scene by scene, and he's we're just trying to play it out in our minds. And of
Yeah.
course I think when the script is written well enough that it does come off the page visually in one's mind. And I
Yeah.
and I remember
There you
that about
go.
Abigail, that
Okay.
when I read it, it was like I could see the shots portraying in my head. And I
Okay.
think then now it becomes a conversation coming back to, let's say with Kelly, where it's like, okay, this is what I saw when I read this. What do you think of this? And then you have that
Right.
conversation.
Okay.
And we actually sat down and we wrote up, the shot list, shot by shot for the entire film through the course of about a week. And so we just would go, like I said, scene by scene. I would kind of tell him like, oh, this is how this kind of played in my mind. And
Yeah.
then we also thought about the practicality of some scenes. Like
Okay.
we even to the sense of, um, do we think we're going to have an entire day to work on, this one scene, or do we
Right.
think, that we're going to be shooting a bunch of these related scenes in the same setting that day? How much time do we think we're going to have for these shots? And that came into the conversation that early, and
Yeah.
it actually helped. And we knew that this project, because it's an indie film, we don't
Yeah.
have a ton of money behind it, so we tried shooting it in a shorter period of time. I think
Of
the
course.
whole principle was probably about 14 days or so. So it's a bit pushed on the schedule. So so
Yeah,
we
that's a
really had to
quick
have that
shoot.
talk. Yeah, yeah. So we had to have that talk about, okay, so if that's our window, what can we do within this, without getting too crazy to where we know we're just not ever going to have enough time for any of our shots.
Right.
And the good thing is having that working relationship with Kelly, like, someone like him, he understands that because he has kind of a shooter's mind as well.
Right.
He's done plenty of videography, cinematography type gigs as
Yeah.
well. So I think that helps. So we it's that conversation, I think, is pretty easy with him. So we talked a lot about like developing masters where
Yeah.
it may start on a close up and then it dollies over and now we're in a two shot and then maybe it dollies back, and we tried to figure out shots so we could do where we could get the most bang out of the buck for those shots. And we may use just the first part of the shot, or
Yeah.
we end up using the whole shot
Oh,
as a
that makes
safety, if
sense.
anything,
Yeah.
so we would always start with that shot. We'd start with the big, not big shot, but something where it had a lot more movement to it, whether it was
Gotcha.
on the movie or it was on the Dana Dolly or whatever. At least we had something that gave the entire scene coverage. Then we go back and start picking out, close-ups and so
Editing
forth.
it out. Yeah.
Yeah. So that
I think
helped.
that's
Yeah.
fascinating. And it
Yeah.
yeah, Kelly does have a great eye, but there are directors out there who
Hmm.
don't know lenses.
Yeah.
They don't know anything really
Yeah.
behind the camera, and
Right.
yet they have a vision, right? And so then
You're right.
you come in and then you almost have to kind of dissect what
Yeah.
that director wants, right?
Yeah, and so I think if it gets to that case where they're not as technically prone with what all the,
Yeah.
like you said, like, oh, I don't know what a 24 millimeter is
Yeah.
versus an 85 millimeter,
Yeah.
those kinds of things. That's okay. Like, I feel like I can still have that conversation of saying, okay, well, if you see the shot here and you can see your actor from
Yeah.
head to waist, and then we're going to push in, and
Yeah.
now we're going to dolly over, and now we'll see both actors standing there. You just try to talk in the language
Right.
that makes the
Gotcha.
most sense to them, if you have to,
You really need to
I
be on
think,
your game.
yeah, yeah. But I think it really does help to, like, I feel like I've got a pretty good like visual memory, or and that I can, like I said, when I'm reading a script, I can see these visuals just start popping up in my mind. And I think that's probably probably one of my better aspects that I can bring, is because I can visualize it before, we actually are in the space and using the
Awesome.
equipment and everything. I feel like I have a good like spatial
Yeah.
cognition of, I can go in, we scout the space, I can remember it pretty well visually. I can
Yeah.
remember, and then I think, okay, size wise, I think we could do this or that. But it helps because then when we have those meetings later on, as far as going through shots and so forth, that I have a better sense then of what is realistic, what is possible. So I think, like, and I never want to speak in the sense where it's like it gets in the way of the creative,
Right.
because I feel like sometimes though, like, when you're given maybe a little bit smaller parameters,
Yeah.
you actually get the opportunity to be more creative, because
Sure.
now you know what you're working within. I almost feel like it's harder when, if someone's like, here's a blank check and you can do whatever you want
I
in this
totally
big
agree.
blank, like that's tough. But if
I
they're like,
totally agree.
okay, we know that we're going to be in this, in the
Yeah.
example of Abigail, we know we're going to be in this mobile home, basically it's like a double wide, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So okay, now things have become more limited as far as what my choices are for shots, what I can do. But at the same time, I'm starting to think, okay, I know that the doorway's here and this and that, and I can dolly from the hallway into the
Yeah.
kitchen and different things, like, so I like getting those challenges. I like, playing with that.
I was going to ask you what lights you up as a cinematographer, but I think we just hit it.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I totally agree with you. I love parameters. I love to know what kind of sandbox I'm playing in. So
yes,
when I have a client come up to me and they say, "This is what I need. This is what I want to do. This is what we're limited to," I get excited
yeah,
because
yes,
it forces me to be even better, forces me to be more creative.
yeah,
And just to see that you have that type of a mindset, like
hmm,
that shows how much you've mastered this craft and love doing it. Because if
yeah,
you're insecure or unsure in your ability and someone
yeah.
tells you, well, this is what I need, you start to panic and crumble. So
Yeah,
yeah, I think that's fantastic.
yeah, I think it comes from a sense of working a career of where you're always trying to problem solve. And even if it isn't like a feature film gig, you might be working on something like, like I do a lot of like branded content for UFC with their co-sponsors, let's say, and they
Okay.
want those to be as creative as possible. But at the same time, you definitely are given parameters of what you can shoot and what you can't,
Yeah.
and where you are. You might be in a gym where the guy is working out, or
Yeah.
the girl, and they're preparing for a fight. So there's certain things like, you're like, oh, I can't have them go running across a meadow for their training scene, or they there's usually pretty
You're not going to be
limited
in the
use as
middle
far as
of Russia in the
yeah.
deep winter while
Yeah,
you're
right.
training against Dolph Lundgren. All
Yeah,
right, so
exactly.
all right, as a cinematographer, it sounds like for you, you enjoy reading a script that's written
Mhm.
that can kind of create that theater of the mind. So
Yes.
I think from my perspective, it's important then as a writer to not be putting in all the camera directions and creating
Right.
the scene for you, but developing the scene in a way that really
Yeah.
kind of fires up your creativity. So I think that
Yeah.
that's a great note for any writer out there to know.
Yeah. To add to that, what I would say is like, um, I've certainly read like a lot of the screenwriting books and have
Yeah.
taken some courses and stuff, but like the pointers I always saw that helped me when I'm reading them as a cinematographer is just making those scenes as visual and as visceral as possible.
Awesome.
Really just, tapping into the senses, even if it's like talking about how something smells, or
Right.
the even the audible type
Yeah.
things that are happening, in there. But I feel like the better written scripts are really juicy. They really have a
Yeah.
lot of like trinkets of pieces of things that you can take, and certain things will resonate, with me more than other things will for another DP, let's say. But I think that's what's cool about it, is that certain, these little elements,
Yeah.
certain things will call out. And then like let's say when I'm working with Kelly, I'll say, oh, I really love that line where uh you talked about the train going by in the background, and
Yeah.
now I really want to frame that up to get that train in there, with
Cool.
the, so, and then thinking about where's the sun and lighting in relation to that, or is it an evening shot, so
Yeah.
forth. So but it gets the conversation going, and it really makes it easier, because we all then have this visualization of where the story should go, if it's really visually told in that screenplay, as it should be, as a good one will.
Right.
And the good writers do that.
As a cinematographer, I'm just curious, how much more difficult is your job when you have to deal with special effects? And I think of, since we've been talking about Abigail haunting,
Yeah.
I think of the bathroom scene
Yeah.
where she's choking and gagging.
Yeah.
That's a terrifying scene, and it upset my wife. So obviously it was a job well done. So like when I think of a scene like that had to be a challenge to kind of create.
Yes, it is. And again, it comes back to that conversation you're having before you film it, of course. And you really, it comes down to the creativity aspect of it. Like what crazy things do we want to try to have happen here? Like with her, like, having the face stretch and things coming out of her mouth and this and that, like that, you start talking about the creatives, and then you're like, okay, what do we think we really can pull off with our budget, with our means, and the time frame that we want to spend on this? So I think that all comes into play. We do know, obviously we know some visual effects people, and so we'll reach out to them too if it really seems like a complex type scene, and we'll ask them and be like, what do you think this will entail? Because I'll have maybe a general sense of it, of like, I think I'm going to need to put a green screen behind the actor because we're going to need to, put something in behind them. So we're going to have to take them out, put something else in, and then get a plate shot of the environment, and so forth. So, are you working? Just break it down.
Are you working with lighting as well, or colors or anything like that to kind of help build up the creepiness of that scene?
Yeah. I think, lighting is so important as far as really establishing your scenes and how they feel. Not only the color of the lighting, but the quality of the lighting. And is it coming from the windows? Is it coming from overhead or underneath? Or is it just there's one kind of flickering light off in the corner and everything else feels very kind of dark, and that bathroom scene's kind of like that, where, we designed it to make it look like you have maybe some of the fluorescent overheads on, but less, like it's darker than, because that bathroom we filmed in, it was actually nicer than we made it appear, because if you turn on the overheads in there, it's bright and happy in there. So,
really?
So all the lighting is, our own lighting putting in there.
Oh, okay.
And then flickering some of the lights, and then some of the flickering is in the post side of it too. So, and that's all something we talk about, is like, what can we do, practically, and what can we do in post, and mix those things together. Obviously, I always love trying to do things practical as much as possible. I always, there's a sense of pride in that too, when
I bet
you can pull off a visual effect that really is a practical. So like, for example, in Abigail, all the things shooting out of the cabinets, like that's a practical effect. We got guys, like there were cabinets where the other sides of them open, and so they were literally just throwing things and it forced the doors open. They came through.
That's
we tried
awesome.
rigging things with like fish line and so forth. I think it ultimately was just the one. I think the shots that worked best were the ones where they literally just forced them through and didn't have to pull on any strings or anything, and it just felt, they had kind of that poltergeist moment to it, I felt, but that was fun because it was a fully practical thing. We actually talked about all these visual effects we could have done with it. We were going to get, all these, like 40 objects that'd be thrown in later, cups and dishes and all this. But then after we shot it, we thought, there's something kind of nice about how realistic this feels. Because once we start adding digital elements, like, it's a roll of the dice, and even if it ends up looking bad, that could end up costing you a lot of money to get that put in there, because you had somebody spend all that time to do it. So
I gotta tell you, it creeped me out because I lived in a house where stuff would fly off shelves.
Oh God.
And lights would flicker. It was
boy.
Yeah, we were there for a couple of years. We were like, we gotta get the hell out of here. So when you sell the house, you don't tell the next couple. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share in your social media where you can tag us at The Successful Screenwriter.